Hello there and welcome to Calm Mind, where thoughts finally slow down. Tonight, we embark on a gentle journey far above the ground, to a quiet band of light that circles the earth like a soft crown, like a luminous embrace offered by the planet itself to the darkness of space. The northern lights, or Aurora Borealis, are not a fantasy painted onto the sky by imagination or myth. They are a real, physical conversation between the sun, the earth, and the thin air where space begins. As you lie down and close your eyes, as you allow your body to settle into whatever surface holds you, imagine that your physical form is safe on the dark earth below, while your mind, free and light, drifts upward, closer to that slow, silent dance that has been unfolding for billions of years. Breathe in gently, as if drawing in the cold, clean air of a polar night. Air so pure and clear that it seems to carry no weight at all. Breathe out slowly, releasing the entire day into the darkness, letting it dissolve like mist into the vast night sky. As you breathe, know that high above you, impossibly far yet intimately connected to this moment, a river of particles streams from the sun. This is the solar wind, a continuous flow of charged particles, mostly electrons and protons, streaming outward from our star in every direction at hundreds of kilometers per second. Imagine this invisible river, this cosmic current, rushing through the solar system, past Mercury, past Venus, toward Earth. Most of this wind passes by our planet without touching it at all, turned aside by something you cannot see, but that is always there, always working, Earth's magnetic field. This magnetic field is wrapped around the planet like a protective cloak, an invisible shield generated deep within Earth's molten core. It extends far into space, creating a region called the magnetosphere, a bubble of magnetic influence that stands between you and the raw power of the sun. Without this field, the solar wind would strip away our atmosphere, would bombard the surface with radiation. But the field is here, has always been here, quietly doing its work. As you relax your shoulders, feel them dropping away from your ears. Let your jaw soften, your tongue rest easy in your mouth. Release any tension held in your forehead, around your eyes. As your body softens, picture the Earth as it appears from space, a blue and white sphere suspended in blackness, wrapped in its invisible magnetic cocoon. The magnetosphere stretches on the side facing the sun, compressed by the pressure of the solar wind, like a shield leaning into the force it deflects. On the night side of Earth, away from the sun, the magnetosphere stretches out into a long tail, the magnetotail, drawn out by that same solar wind pressure, extending for hundreds of thousands of kilometers into the darkness behind the planet. In that vast, dark region, energy builds quietly, patiently, like tension stored in a drawn bow, like potential waiting for release. When conditions are right, when the magnetic fields carried by the solar wind align in particular ways with Earth's own field, something beautiful happens. The field lines from the Sun and from Earth can reconnect, like two rivers meeting and merging. When this reconnect ion occurs, the stored energy releases suddenly, flinging particles along invisible magnetic paths toward the poles, toward the high northern and southern latitudes where you might stand and witness the result. These particles, electrons mostly, but also protons, rush downward, guided not by gravity but by the curved geometry of Earth's magnetic field. They follow the field lines that arc down from space into the upper atmosphere, spiraling as they go, accelerating, carrying their energy toward the thin air tens and hundreds of miles above the surface. Let your breath be slow and regular, matching the ancient rhythm of this process. As those particles begin to meet the atmosphere, the tenuous gases that still cling to Earth at those great heights, they collide with atoms and molecules. Mostly oxygen and nitrogen, the same gases you breathe but spread so thin at those altitudes that the air would seem like vacuum to you. Yet there is enough substance there for collisions to occur. When a charged particle from space strikes an atom of oxygen or nitrogen, it transfers energy. The atom becomes excited. One of its electrons is lifted to a higher energy state, like lifting a weight to a higher shelf. But this elevated state is unstable. It cannot last. Within a fraction of a second, or sometimes after lingering for longer moments, that electron falls back to where it began, to its ground state. And when it falls, the excess energy must go somewhere. It is released as light. A tiny packet of electromagnetic energy called a photon is emitted, carrying away the energy that was briefly stored. Each collision creates one of these infinitesimal flashes. No single one is visible. No single photon could catch your eye in the vastness of the night. But there are millions, billions, countless collisions happening simultaneously across a vast region of the upper atmosphere. Together, these invisible individual events flicker and shimmer and blend into something the human eye can perceive. The living curtain of the aurora, the dancing lights, the glowing rivers and ribbons and sheets that stretch across the polar sky. What appears to be a single, coherent phenomenon is actually the sum of innumerable quantum events, each one following the same physical laws, each one contributing its tiny spark to the collective radiance. You do not have to understand every detail of how this works. You do not need to memorize the names of the processes or calculate the energies involved. You can simply rest in the idea, the beautiful truth, that the sky glows because the universe is full of movement, of energy, of constant interaction. And Earth, patient and wise, is expert at turning that movement into something gentle and beautiful. Just as your body turns the day's activity into quiet repair as you sleep, processing experiences, consolidating memories, healing tissues, balancing chemicals, The planet turns stormy solar energy into a luminous veil of calm. The aurora is not chaos made visible. It is order made luminous. It is physics transformed into poetry. As you continue to breathe, as your body grows heavier and more relaxed, know that this process has been happening for as long as Earth has had an atmosphere and a magnetic field. Long before there were eyes to see it, the aurora glowed above the ancient poles. Long before there were minds to wonder at it, the sky danced with colored light. And it will continue long after all of us, continuing its conversation between star and planet, turning energy into beauty in the silent darkness above the ice. Tonight, you are simply a witness to something that does not need witnesses. You are resting beneath a phenomenon that occurs whether or not anyone watches. And there is profound peace in that, in knowing that the universe continues its work, its transformations, its displays of ordered beauty, independent of your attention, your understanding, your presence. You can let go. You can rest. The sky knows what to do. So settle deeper now into your body, into this moment, into this night. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Notice the rise and fall of your chest with each breath. Allow your mind to release its grip on the details, on the need to understand or remember or figure out. Just be here, beneath the imagined aurora, beneath the protective magnetosphere, beneath the streaming solar wind, beneath the vast indifference and simultaneous intimacy of the cosmos. The lights are there, whether you imagine them vividly or not at all. They are there in reality, at this very moment, glowing above the Arctic, above the Antarctic, circling both poles in their perpetual dance. And you are here, safe, breathing, preparing to sleep. That is enough. That is everything. Imagine now that you are lying on your back in the snow, but you are not cold. You are warm, protected, wrapped in layers that keep the chill at bay while allowing you to lie still beneath the open sky. Your body is held by the earth, supported completely, while the air above you is clear and cold and perfectly transparent. The night is deep, the kind of darkness that only exists far from cities, far from artificial light. At first, the sky is only dark, scattered with more stars than you have ever seen in your life. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of faint light, and individual stars burn with a steady, ancient fire. There is no moon tonight, or perhaps just a thin crescent that has already set, leaving the sky to the stars alone. You lie there in the perfect darkness, breathing, waiting, though you do not know you are waiting. Then, at the far northern horizon, something changes. It is so subtle at first that you almost miss it. A faint, pale band appears, almost like a river of smoke or a distant cloud caught by some unseen light source. It is not bright. It is not dramatic. It is just barely there, a suggestion of luminosity against the dark. You might mistake it for your imagination, for the ghost of an afterimage, for nothing at all. But slowly, almost shyly, it begins to brighten. The pale band gains substance, becomes more defined, separates itself from the darkness around it. And you realize you are seeing something real, something outside yourself, something that exists independent of your perception but has chosen this moment to reveal itself. This is the aurora beginning. This is the first light. That faint band is the first sign that solar particles have reached your side of the planet. These particles, electrons primarily, but also protons, have traveled an enormous distance. They left the Sun days ago, perhaps during a solar flare or coronal mass ejection, perhaps just as part of the continuous solar wind that streams outward always, in all directions, filling the space between worlds. They have crossed the 93 million miles between Sun and Earth, traveling through the near vacuum of interplanetary space at speeds of hundreds or thousands of kilometers per second. They have slipped into Earth's magnetic field where it opens near the poles, where the field lines that arch out into space curve back down toward the planet, and they have been accelerated, guided, funneled along these invisible highways of magnetic force. And now they have arrived. Now they are colliding with the upper atmosphere, with atoms and molecules that float in the thin air 60, 80, 100 miles above the surface. When a fast-moving electron strikes an atom of oxygen or nitrogen, it transfers some of its kinetic energy. The atom absorbs this energy, and one of its electrons is boosted to a higher energy level. This is called excitation. The atom has been excited, energized, lifted to an unstable state. But atoms prefer to exist in their lowest energy state, their ground state, where they are most stable. The excited electron cannot remain in its elevated orbital for long. Within nanoseconds, or sometimes after lingering for up to a second depending on the specific transition, it falls back down, returning to its original energy level. And when it falls, the energy that lifted it must be released. It is released as a photon, a particle of light, a quantum of electromagnetic radiation. Each falling electron produces one photon, carrying away the exact amount of energy that was temporarily stored. The wavelength of that photon, its color, depends on the energy difference between the excited state and the ground state. Different atoms, different transitions, produce different wavelengths, different colors. In the air above you, millions upon millions of oxygen atoms at altitudes around 60 to 150 miles are undergoing this process. They are being struck by electrons from the solar wind, being excited, and then emitting photons as they relax back to their ground state. The wavelength they emit most commonly is about 557.7 nanometers, which corresponds to a yellow-green color. This is the characteristic green of the aurora, the shade that dominates most displays, the color your eyes are most sensitive to in the darkness. Your breathing continues, slow and steady, as the band of light lifts higher in the sky. What began as a faint glow on the horizon now begins to take shape, to organize itself. It forms an arc, a bow of light that stretches from one side of the horizon to the other, perfectly aligned with the invisible geometry of Earth's magnetic field. The arc is not straight like a rainbow. It curves and undulates, following the field lines that channel the precipitating particles. Sometimes the aurora remains like this, a quiet arc, stable and still, barely moving, just a soft glow across the northern sky. It can persist in this state for minutes or hours, a gentle presence that asks nothing of you except perhaps wonder. Other times, and tonight is one of those times, the aurora begins to change, to evolve, to become more active and complex. The arc begins to fold. What was a smooth band becomes textured, structured, divided into vertical striations like curtains hanging from an invisible rod high in the sky. These curtains can be thin or thick, closely spaced or separated by dark gaps. They extend downward from the arc, reaching toward the horizon but never quite touching the earth, always hovering at altitudes far above the highest mountains. And then the curtains begin to move. They ripple and wave, fold and unfold, as if blown by a silent wind that exists only in the upper atmosphere. The motion is not random. It reflects changes in the flow of particles from space, variations in the strength and direction of the electric and magnetic fields that guide them, fluctuations in the density and composition of the atmosphere they are colliding with. Every twist, every ripple, every surge of brightness carries information about conditions in the magnetosphere and the upper air. The lowest edge of this auroral curtain is usually around 80 miles above the surface, approximately 130 kilometers. This is well above the altitude where airplanes fly, well above the region we think of as the atmosphere in our daily lives. But it is still technically within Earth's atmosphere, in the thermosphere, where air molecules are so sparse that they rarely collide with each other, where the concept of temperature begins to lose its usual meaning because there is so little matter to carry heat. The top of the aurora can reach much higher, 200 miles, 300 miles, sometimes extending to altitudes of 600 miles or more during intense geomagnetic storms. So when you watch the lights move, when you see them dance and shimmer, you are watching something enormous, something vastly larger than any mountain range or storm system on Earth's surface. You are watching a phenomenon that occupies a volume of space comparable to a continent, yet is made of nothing but light. Photons streaming toward your eyes from atoms that have been briefly energized and have released their excess as color. Let your body feel heavier as the sky becomes more alive. Feel your legs sinking into the bed or the floor beneath you. Feel your arms growing dense and still. Your breath is automatic now, requiring no thought, just continuing its rhythm like a tide. And above, the aurora intensifies. The curtains brighten, flare, pulse with sudden surges of luminosity that race along their length like waves traveling on a rope that has been shaken. These waves, these pulsations, are real physical phenomena. They are caused by variations in the flow of electrons along magnetic field lines, by electric currents in the ionosphere, by oscillations in the magnetic field itself. Scientists study these dynamics, measure their frequencies, track their patterns. But from the ground, you do not need to analyze. You simply watch, or in this case, imagine watching, as the sky comes alive with structured, patterned, beautiful motion. The magnetosphere, that vast protective region surrounding Earth, is constantly adjusting, constantly shifting and reshaping itself in response to the changing solar wind. When the solar wind is calm and steady, the magnetosphere maintains a relatively stable configuration, and the aurora is quiet, perhaps just a faint glow. But when the solar wind becomes turbulent, when its speed increases or its magnetic field rotates into an orientation that allows reconnect ion with Earth's field, energy flows into the magnetosphere. This inflowing energy is stored temporarily in the magnetotail, in the stretched field lines and plasma currents on the night side of Earth. Then, through processes that are complex and not entirely understood even by experts, this energy is suddenly released. Particles are accelerated, electric fields intensify, and a surge of electrons pours down into the atmosphere along field lines that converge toward the magnetic poles. The aurora brightens dramatically, expands equator-ward, becomes active and dynamic. These episodes are called substorms, and they can last for minutes to hours. During a substorm, the aurora can change rapidly. Curtains can break apart and reform, arcs can brighten and fade, new structures can appear and dissolve. The sky becomes a stage for a performance that is both chaotic and ordered, random and patterned, unpredictable in its details but governed by underlying physical laws. Even when you cannot see the aurora, even when clouds obscure it or when it occurs at latitudes far from where you live, this process often continues. There may be weak auroras glowing beyond the horizon at this very moment, too faint for the naked eye but still present, still marking the interaction between solar wind and magnetosphere. Instruments can detect them: sensitive cameras, magnetometers, rheometers that measure the absorption of radio waves. The aurora is almost always there in some form, circling the polar regions every clear night. Like so many quiet processes in nature, the growth of trees, the erosion of mountains, the slow movement of continents, the aurora does not demand attention. It simply continues its work, its transformation of energy, its glowing presence in the high atmosphere. Most nights, most places, most people never see it. But it is there nonetheless, faithful and persistent, a feature of this planet as constant as the ocean tides or the changing seasons. As you drift deeper into relaxation, as your conscious mind becomes quieter and your thoughts less insistent, Remember that Earth is always in conversation with the Sun. This conversation is usually quiet, gentle, balanced. The Sun sends energy and particles. Earth receives them, channels them, transforms them. Most of this interaction is invisible, imperceptible to human senses. We do not feel the solar wind striking the magnetosphere. We do not hear the hiss of electrons colliding with atoms 100 miles overhead. But occasionally, conditions align in such a way that this conversation becomes visible. The aurora is the planet's way of making the invisible visible, of translating processes that occur at the scale of magnetic fields and particle streams into something a human being can perceive and appreciate. It is a gift, in a sense, a window into the larger forces that shape our existence, usually hidden but always present. Tonight, as you rest, the northern lights are one way the planet answers the constant stream of energy flowing toward it. They are a response, a reply, a turning of raw particles and magnetic forces into a soft, wordless language of color. They say, here is what happens when worlds interact, when energy meets matter, when invisible becomes visible. They say, this is beautiful, and it is real, and it requires nothing from you except perhaps a moment of recognition. The aurora you are imagining now may be more vivid or more subdued than any real aurora you have seen or will see. That is fine. The details do not matter as much as the feeling, the sense of being beneath something vast and ancient and ongoing. Whether the lights you picture are bright green or pale white, whether they move rapidly or hang nearly still, the essential truth remains. They are the glow of energy transformed, the visible trace of Earth's magnetic embrace, the light of a conversation between worlds. Let that image soften now. Let the aurora become less a thing you are actively visualizing and more a presence you sense in the background, a knowing that above the atmosphere, above the clouds, above the layers of air you breathe, there is this glowing ring around the pole, this crown of light that the planet wears in the darkness. It is there. It continues. And you can rest beneath it, held by gravity, warmed by the Earth's interior heat, protected by the magnetic field that makes the aurora possible. Now let your perspective shift, your point of view expand. Imagine leaving the surface of the Earth, your body remaining safe below while your awareness floats upward, rising past the aurora with its curtains of green and red, past the thin upper atmosphere where particles collide and light is born, past the protective cocoon of the magnetosphere, out into the space between planets. Before you, at the center of the solar system, the sun hangs suspended in the darkness. It is not the gentle yellow disk you see from Earth's surface, filtered and softened by the atmosphere. From space, unmediated, it is intensely bright, almost white, radiating across the entire electromagnetic spectrum with a power that is difficult to comprehend. Every second, the sun converts about 4 million tons of matter into pure energy through nuclear fusion in its core, and that energy radiates outward, warming worlds, driving weather, making life possible. The sun is not a static ball of fire, not an unchanging lamp that simply shines. It is a dynamic sphere of hot plasma, ionized gas, hydrogen, and helium primarily, so hot that electrons have been stripped from their atomic nuclei, creating a soup of charged particles. This plasma is constantly moving, bubbling, churning, driven by convection currents that rise from the deep interior to the visible surface and then sink back down. Strong magnetic fields loop and twist within this plasma, giving rise to darker regions called sunspots, to bright regions called faculae, to sudden explosive releases called solar flares. These magnetic fields are generated by the sun's rotation and by the movement of charged plasma in its interior, through a process similar to the geodynamo that creates Earth's magnetic field but on a vastly larger and more powerful scale. The sun's magnetic field extends far out into space, carried by the solar wind, creating a structure called the heliosphere that encompasses all the planets and extends beyond the orbit of Pluto, defining the sun's domain of influence. From the sun's hot outer atmosphere, called the corona, a continuous stream of particles flows outward in all directions. This is the solar wind, not a metaphorical wind but a real flow of matter, mostly electrons and protons, streaming away from the sun at typical speeds of 400 kilometers per second, sometimes much slower, sometimes much faster during solar storms. This wind is tenuous. In the region near Earth, it contains only about 5 particles per cubic centimeter, far fewer than the best laboratory vacuum. But it is real, measurable, and it carries with it energy, momentum, and magnetic field. Breathe slowly as you picture this journey, this cosmic odyssey of particles. A cloud of charged particles leaves the sun, perhaps from a coronal hole where the magnetic field opens outward and allows plasma to escape more easily. Perhaps from a coronal mass ejection where a massive bubble of plasma is explosively released following the reorganization of tangled magnetic fields. Whatever its origin, this cloud of particles begins its journey outward, accelerating away from the sun, carried by its own pressure and by the magnetic forces embedded within it. The journey takes time, typically 2 to 4 days for the solar wind to reach Earth's orbit, longer for slower flows, shorter for the fastest ejections. During this time, the particles travel through nearly empty space, passing the orbit of Mercury, passing Venus, gradually expanding and cooling as they spread outward. Most of this wind will blow past Earth entirely, continuing on toward Mars, toward Jupiter, toward the outer solar system and eventually the heliopause where the solar wind finally meets the interstellar medium and slows to subsonic speeds. But a fraction of the solar wind will encounter Earth. It will meet the obstacle that is Earth's magnetic field, the magnetosphere. This magnetic field is not a rigid shell or barrier. It is more like a flexible bubble, a region of space dominated by Earth's magnetic influence rather than the sun's. When the solar wind strikes this bubble, it cannot simply pass through. The charged particles of the wind are affected by magnetic forces, and these forces deflect the flow around the magnetosphere, much as water flows around a rock in a stream. The shape that results is characteristic and predictable. On the day side, facing the Sun, the magnetosphere is compressed, pushed in by the constant pressure of the solar wind. The magnetopause, the boundary between Earth's magnetic domain and the solar wind, is typically located about 10 Earth radii from the planet center on the sunward side. On the night side, away from the Sun, the pressure is released, and the magnetosphere stretches out into a long tail, the magnetotail, which extends for hundreds of Earth radii downstream. This configuration is not static. It changes constantly as the solar wind speed and density vary, as the embedded magnetic field rotates and fluctuates. When the solar wind is strong, the dayside magnetopause is pushed closer to Earth, compressing the magnetosphere. When the wind is weak, the magnetopause moves outward, allowing the magnetosphere to expand slightly. And when the magnetic field carried by the solar wind has a particular orientation, specifically when it points southward, opposite to Earth's predominantly northward magnetic field, something crucial can happen. The southward component of the interplanetary magnetic field can interact directly with Earth's field at the dayside magnetopause. Opposite magnetic fields can annihilate each other in a process called magnetic reconnect ion, where field lines from the Sun and Earth break and then rejoin in a new configuration. This reconnect ion process converts magnetic energy into kinetic energy and heat, accelerating particles and allowing solar wind plasma to penetrate into the magnetosphere. The reconnected field lines, now connected to both the Sun and Earth, are dragged downstream by the solar wind, carried into the magnetotail like string being pulled by a flowing current. Energy is stored in the magnetotail as the field lines stretch and the embedded plasma is compressed. Tension builds, like energy stored in a stretched rubber band. And eventually, through processes that are still being studied and debated, this energy is released. On the night side of Earth, in the magnetotail, another reconnect ion event can occur. Field lines that were stretched out into the tail reconnect, snapping back toward Earth like a released slingshot, and the stored energy is suddenly converted into the acceleration of particles. Electrons and protons are flung earthward along the newly closed field lines, spiraling along them as they converge toward the magnetic poles at high northern and southern latitudes. This is the mechanism, the chain of cause and effect, that connects a disturbance on the Sun to the aurora dancing above the polar regions. A coronal mass ejection launches plasma into space. That plasma travels to Earth, carrying embedded magnetic fields. Those fields reconnect with Earth's own field, allowing energy to enter the magnetosphere. The energy is stored in the magnetotail, then released, accelerating particles that stream down field lines into the upper atmosphere. And there, those particles collide with atoms, exciting them, causing them to emit light, the aurora. Your breathing stays gentle and unhurried as you imagine this invisible infrastructure, this hidden architecture of fields and flows that connects Sun to Earth across 93 million miles of space. You cannot see magnetic field lines. You cannot see the solar wind. You cannot watch particles being accelerated in the magnetotail. But all of this is real, all of it is happening continuously, and the aurora is the visible proof, the luminous evidence that these invisible processes are ongoing. On the dark side of Earth, those particles are racing along magnetic field lines at this very moment during active times. They spiral around the field lines in helical paths, following the converging geometry that funnels them toward the poles. As they descend into denser atmosphere, their collisions become more frequent. They deposit their energy into the atmospheric atoms and molecules, and those atoms and molecules glow in response, creating the curtains and arcs and rays of the aurora. Sometimes, during strong geomagnetic storms, events caused by particularly powerful solar eruptions or sustained periods of southward interplanetary magnetic field, the aurora can expand far from its usual high-latitude home. The auroral oval, normally confined to regions within about 20 degrees of the magnetic poles, can bulge equatorward, reaching lower latitudes where people rarely see it, where it is unexpected and astonishing. On those nights, cities that never expect green skies may suddenly find them glowing. People in places like Seattle or Minneapolis or Scotland or northern China may look up and see the aurora, something they thought of as belonging only to the Arctic or Antarctic. Cameras and smartphones capture images that circulate on social media, and for a brief time, many people are reminded that they live on a planet embedded in a larger cosmic environment, a planet that interacts with its star in ways both subtle and dramatic. But even when conditions are calm, even during solar minimum when the sun's activity is low and coronal mass ejections are infrequent, the same basic exchange continues. The solar wind still flows. Earth's magnetosphere still deflects it. Particles still find their way into the magnetotail and are eventually precipitated into the atmosphere along field lines near the poles. The aurora is almost always present in some form, even if faint, even if only detectable by instruments, even if unseen by human eyes. This is a relationship older than humanity, playing out for billions of years before any conscious being ever noticed, before eyes evolved to see visible light, before the first life emerged from Earth's ancient oceans. The sun has been shining for about 4.6 billion years. Earth's magnetic field, generated by the churning liquid iron in the outer core, has likely existed for most of that time, perhaps for 3.5 billion years or more, though its strength and configuration have varied. And as long as both have existed, the sun sending its wind, Earth wrapped in its magnetic field, there have been auroras. As you rest, as your body continues its own quiet work of maintenance and renewal, think of your own being likewise receiving energy during the day. Sunlight strikes your skin, warming you. Light enters your eyes, allowing you to see, regulating your circadian rhythms. You consume food, and your body extracts the chemical energy stored in it, transforms it, uses it to power your thoughts and movements and metabolic processes. You absorb information, experiences, sensations, all of which are forms of energy, broadly construed. At night, in your own quiet way, you reorganize, integrate, reset. Your brain processes memories, consolidates learning, clears metabolic waste. Your body repairs tissues, adjusts hormone levels, strengthens immune responses. You are not simply passive during sleep. You are engaged in transformation, turning the day's inputs into the foundations for tomorrow's capacities. The solar wind and aurora are, in a sense, a cosmic version of this transformation, turning raw energy input into something organized, something beautiful, something that serves a purpose, even if that purpose is simply to exist. You do not need to command the sun to shine. You do not need to tell it when to release a coronal mass ejection or how fast to blow its wind. You do not need to manage Earth's magnetic field or calculate the trajectories of particles in the magnetotail. All of this happens without your participation, without your awareness, according to physical laws that were established long before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. You are carried within a system that already knows what to do. The sun knows how to fuse hydrogen into helium, releasing energy. Earth knows how to generate a protective magnetic field. The magnetosphere knows how to deflect the solar wind and channel some particles toward the poles. The atmosphere knows how to glow when energized. And you, lying here in darkness, know how to sleep, how to rest, how to let go of conscious control and trust in the deeper processes that sustain you. Your role now is simply to rest in it, like a passenger riding through the night beneath a glowing, moving sky, beneath the invisible architecture of magnetic fields, beneath the streaming solar wind that never stops, beneath the sun that has shone for billions of years and will shine for billions more. You are safe within this system. You are held by forces larger than yourself, and you can rest. The next time you imagine the northern lights, as you picture them dancing above a dark landscape or reflect on memories of seeing them, attend carefully to their colors. For the aurora is not simply light in some generic sense. It is a palette, a spectrum, a carefully determined display where each hue carries information about altitude, atmospheric composition, and the energy of the colliding particles. The most common color, the one that dominates the majority of auroral displays, and the one you would most likely see if you traveled to the Arctic on a clear night, is a soft green. Sometimes this green is pale and diffuse, spread across the sky like a luminous fog. Other times it is vivid and bright, concentrated into ribbons and arcs that seem to pulse with their own internal energy. This green can be almost yellow-green, lime-like, or it can shade toward a purer, more emerald tone. This characteristic green comes from oxygen atoms, specifically from oxygen atoms at altitudes of roughly 60 to 150 miles above Earth's surface. When an oxygen atom is struck by an electron from the solar wind and one of its electrons is excited to a higher energy level, it can relax back to the ground state by emitting a photon at a very specific wavelength, 557.7 nanometers. This wavelength falls in the green portion of the visible spectrum, and it is precisely this emission that creates the aurora's most common color. The reason this green is so prominent has to do with both physics and biology. Physically, oxygen is abundant in Earth's atmosphere. It makes up about 21% of the air at sea level, and while the atmosphere thins with altitude, oxygen remains present at the heights where auroras occur. So there are many oxygen atoms available to be excited and to emit light. Biologically, the human eye is especially sensitive to light in the green part of the spectrum. Our color vision evolved under sunlight, which peaks in the green-yellow range, and our eyes are optimized to detect those wavelengths. So the aurora appears predominantly green both because oxygen is plentiful and because our eyes are good at seeing green. In a sense, the aurora shows us the color it does partly because of who we are as observers, what our particular sensory apparatus is tuned to detect. A different creature, with eyes sensitive to different wavelengths, might perceive the aurora differently, might find other colors more prominent, or might see emissions we cannot see at all. But there are other colors in the aurora, visible to human eyes under the right conditions. Higher in the atmosphere, at altitudes above 150 miles, extending sometimes to 200 or even 300 miles, oxygen atoms can emit a different color, red. This red emission comes from a different type of electronic transition within the oxygen atom, one that requires less energy to excite but takes much longer to relax. Sometimes up to 2 minutes elapse between excitation and emission. At lower altitudes, where the air is denser and collisions between atoms are more frequent, an excited oxygen atom will usually be de-excited by colliding with another atom before it has a chance to emit red light. The energy is transferred to another atom through the collision rather than being released as a photon. But at high altitudes, where the air is so thin that atoms rarely collide, the excited oxygen atoms can persist in their excited state long enough to eventually emit that characteristic red photon at 630 nanometers. These red auroras are less common than green ones, but they do occur. They often appear during strong geomagnetic storms, when high-energy particles penetrate deep into the magnetosphere and excite oxygen atoms at great heights. Sometimes you will see a red glow above the main green aurora, like a crown or a fringe extending upward into the darkness. Other times, during particularly intense storms, the entire aurora can take on a deep crimson or ruby color, glowing like fire in the sky. At lower altitudes, typically below the main green band, another element enters the picture: nitrogen. Nitrogen molecules, N, pairs of nitrogen atoms bonded together, make up about 78% of Earth's atmosphere at ground level and remain abundant at auroral altitudes. When nitrogen molecules are struck by solar wind particles, they can be excited or even ionized, and when they relax, they emit light at different wavelengths than oxygen does. Nitrogen can emit blue and purple light, often forming the lower fringes of auroral curtains or adding violet edges to the moving patterns of green. To the human eye, especially in the darkness where color perception is diminished, these blue and purple emissions can blend into shades of pink, magenta, or subtle lavender. Sometimes the entire lower edge of an auroral curtain will appear tinged with blue, creating a striking contrast with the green above. As you breathe slowly and deeply, imagine these layers stacked above you in the atmosphere like a vertical painting, like the distinct bands of a geological formation exposed in the wall of a canyon. High above, at 200 miles or more, occasional red glows from excited oxygen atoms. In the middle, from about 60 to 150 miles, the dominant green emission from the most common oxygen transition. Below that, closer to 60 miles and sometimes lower, blue and purple fringes from nitrogen molecules. Each color corresponds to a specific altitude and the type of atom or molecule that is emitting light at that height. The full display, seen from the ground, is like looking up at a cross-section through the atmosphere, each layer revealing itself through its characteristic color. But you see only the overall effect, the blended result, the composite image painted across the sky. You do not see the individual quantum events, the countless electrons falling from excited states, the photons streaming downward toward your eyes. You see the integration, the sum, the collective glow. Even more subtle colors can appear under specific conditions. Mixtures of red and green emissions can create yellow or amber tones in some regions of the aurora. Combined emissions from multiple atoms and molecules can produce soft pinks, delicate peaches, subtle color gradations that shift and change as conditions vary. From the ground, especially when the aurora is bright enough to overcome the limitations of your night vision, you might see a riot of colors, a celestial palette more varied than any artist's collection. But in many auroras, especially weaker ones, you might see very little color at all. Your eyes in darkness rely primarily on rod cells, which are sensitive to light but do not distinguish colors well. Cone cells, which enable color vision, require brighter light to function effectively. So many people who see the aurora report it as appearing greenish-white or simply white, with color only becoming apparent in long-exposure photographs that accumulate light over seconds or minutes. This is a reminder that the aurora you see depends not only on the aurora itself but on you as an observer, on the sensitivity of your eyes, on whether you have adapted to darkness, on how bright the aurora is, on your brain's interpretation of the signals coming from your retina. Two people standing side by side might describe the colors slightly differently based on subtle differences in their vision or perception. The aurora is objective, physical, real, but your experience of it is mediated through your particular sensory and cognitive apparatus. Your mind may want to catalog these colors, to memorize the wavelengths and the corresponding atoms and altitudes, to build a mental chart that connects cause and effect, source and appearance. But tonight, you can let those details loosen their hold. It is enough to know that every color in the aurora comes from a specific physical process, a type of atom or molecule at a given height, releasing energy as light after being touched by particles from the sun. The beauty is not random. It is structured, consistent, and deeply physical. The sky's soft greens and reds and blues arise from precise conditions, steady patterns in how nature interacts with itself. There is room for variation and surprise. No two auroras are exactly alike, just as no two snowflakes are identical, but beneath the variation, there is order. There are rules. There is a grammar to the colors that the universe follows without exception. In the same way, your body's processes, heartbeat, breathing, cellular chemistry, neural firing, are not chaotic. They follow patterns, rhythms, cycles that have been refined over evolutionary time. When you look at biological systems closely enough, you find structure, regulation, feedback loops, homeostatic mechanisms. Your body knows how to maintain itself, how to respond to challenges, how to heal from injury, how to balance countless variables simultaneously. It does this not through randomness but through organization, through systems that have been tested and proven over millions of years. Let that idea soothe you, beauty and lawfulness together, not in opposition but as partners, as two aspects of a single reality. The aurora is beautiful because it follows laws, because it is consistent, because when oxygen is excited at 100 miles altitude it will emit green light at 557.7 nanometers every single time, without fail, without variation. And that consistency, that reliability, that deep orderliness of nature is itself a kind of beauty, perhaps the deepest kind. As you lie here tonight, as your body settles more deeply into rest, you can imagine the aurora as Earth's way of glowing back at the sun, of returning some of the energy it receives in the form of visible light that living beings can see and appreciate and wonder at. The planet receives particles and magnetic energy from its star, and it transforms that raw input into color, into pattern, into something that speaks not just to instruments and equations but to the human heart and eye. As you sink deeper towards sleep, the distinction between these specific colors and their causes can blur pleasantly into one soft, moving presence overhead. You do not need to remember which wavelength corresponds to which transition, which altitude produces which hue. You can simply hold the knowledge that the aurora is colored, that it shifts through shades of green and red and blue and purple, that each shade has meaning, has origin, has reason. And that is enough. The palette of night is painted by the simplest ingredients: oxygen and nitrogen, electrons and photons, altitude and energy. Yet from these simple elements, the sky creates something complex and infinitely varied, something that has inspired awe in every human who has witnessed it across all of history. Simple rules, complex beauty, order, wonder, physics, poetry, all at once, all together, all glowing softly in the dark. For countless generations, for thousands upon thousands of years, human beings have stood beneath the northern lights and tried to understand what they were seeing. Long before anyone spoke of solar wind or magnetospheres, long before the concept of atoms existed or the nature of light was understood, the Aurora Borealis appeared as mysterious fire in the sky, a silent, moving presence that seemed to respond to events on Earth, that seemed to carry meaning, intention, message. Different cultures, separated by geography and history but united by their experience of these lights, developed different stories to explain them. And these stories were not simply wrong guesses or primitive superstitions. They were meaningful attempts to integrate the aurora into a larger understanding of the world, to connect the sky to human life, to find pattern and purpose in a phenomenon that appeared without warning and vanished just as mysteriously. Some peoples of the far north, living within the auroral zone where the lights appeared frequently during winter months, saw them as spirits of the dead. The aurora was where ancestors went after leaving the physical world, a celestial realm where they danced and played and watched over the living. On nights when the aurora was particularly active, when the lights moved rapidly and changed form quickly, it was said that the spirits were celebrating, were engaged in games or ceremonies. Some cultures believed you could communicate with the aurora, could whistle or wave and see the lights respond, as if the spirits were aware of the living and curious about them. Other traditions saw the aurora as pathways or bridges, roads that souls traveled between the world of the living and the world of the dead, or routes that gods and supernatural beings used to move between heaven and earth. The vertical rays that sometimes appear in auroras, reaching from horizon to zenith like pillars of light, reinforced this interpretation. These looked like bridges, like ladders, like connections between realms that were ordinarily separate. Still other peoples saw the aurora as omens or warnings. In some Norse traditions, the lights were reflections from the shields and armor of the Valkyries, the warrior maidens who chose which soldiers would die in battle and escorted their souls to Valhalla. A bright aurora might presage war or conflict, might indicate that the gods were preparing for some great event. In Chinese historical records, rare appearances of aurora at lower latitudes were often interpreted as dragons in the sky, as portents of change in the imperial order. Some indigenous peoples of North America told stories that the aurora was caused by animals, by seals playing in the afterlife, by the spirits of salmon leaping, by celestial foxes whose tails brushed the snow and sent up sparks of light. These stories connected the aurora to the natural world and to the animals that were central to survival and culture, weaving the lights into the larger tapestry of relationships between humans, animals, land, and sky. From a scientific perspective, we now know that the aurora is not spirits or pathways or dragons or foxes. It forms when charged particles from the solar wind interact with Earth's magnetic field and collide with atoms in the upper atmosphere, causing those atoms to emit light. The aurora is a physical phenomenon, governed by electromagnetic forces and the laws of atomic physics. It has no consciousness, no intention, no awareness of the humans watching from below. It does not carry messages from gods or ancestors. It simply glows because of the energy flowing through it. But the human tendency to wrap meaning around rare and beautiful events, to see significance in pattern and motion, to create narratives that connect the sky to human concerns. This tendency is itself part of nature. It is part of how minds work, how consciousness interprets and organizes experience. The sky glows because of physics. Minds tell stories because of their own deep patterns, their need for meaning, their drive to connect disparate phenomena into coherent narratives. As you breathe slowly and gently, think of all those eyes over millennia watching the same phenomenon you are imagining now. Hunters in the far north pausing in their work to watch green curtains sweep across the sky, wondering what it meant, telling their children the stories they had been told. Travelers caught by darkness in unfamiliar terrain, cheered or frightened by the unexpected brightening of the night, interpreting it according to their beliefs and expectations. Elders gathering communities to witness a particularly strong display, explaining what they had learned from their own elders, passing down knowledge and interpretation through generations. Each person who saw the aurora brought their own context, their own framework of understanding, their own emotional state and set of concerns. A warrior might see signs of battle. A mourner might see the presence of a lost loved one. A farmer might see omens about the coming season. A child might see magic, pure and simple, without needing any further explanation. The aurora was the same objective phenomenon, but it became different things to different observers, reflecting their inner worlds as much as revealing the outer one. Even now, in an age of satellites and sophisticated instruments, in a time when we can measure the flux of particles and map the currents in the magnetosphere and predict auroral activity days in advance, people still travel long distances to stand under the aurora. They journey to Alaska, to Norway, to Iceland, to northern Canada, places where the lights appear regularly during winter months. They stand in the cold for hours, waiting, watching, hoping to witness this phenomenon firsthand. And when the aurora finally appears, when the sky begins to glow and move, something interesting happens. These modern observers, even if they know the scientific explanation, even if they understand solar wind and excited oxygen atoms, still respond emotionally. They gasp. They might cry. They feel awe, wonder, something that transcends intellectual understanding. Knowledge and emotion merge in that moment. The experience feels larger than the explanation, deeper than the physics can capture. This is not because the physics is wrong or incomplete. It is because human beings are not merely information processing machines. We are also meaning-making creatures, beings who respond to beauty and pattern and mystery with something more than analysis. The aurora can be fully explained by science and still move us to tears, can be reduced to equations and still inspire poetry, can be understood and yet remain profoundly mysterious in its effect on us. You can let this be true tonight. The sky can be both a physical event and a quiet emotional mirror. As the aurora brightens and fades in your imagination, it can reflect your own thoughts, your own worries or hopes or questions, not because the aurora knows them or cares about them, but because it provides a canvas for them. Just as people for thousands of years have projected their concerns and beliefs onto the moving lights, you can allow your inner landscape to find echoes in the outer one. The word Aurora Borealis itself is a product of this human need to name and frame. It combines the name of Aurora, the Roman goddess of the dawn, with Boreas, the Greek word for the north wind. So Aurora Borealis means something like northern dawn or dawn of the north, a light that rises not in the east with the sun, but in the north through the darkness of night. It is a poetic name, chosen in the 17th century by a scientist who wanted to capture both the beauty and the geography of the phenomenon. In the southern hemisphere, a similar phenomenon circles the Antarctic. It is called Aurora Australis, the southern lights, from Australis meaning southern. The same physical processes occur: solar wind particles following magnetic field lines down into the atmosphere at high southern latitudes, colliding with oxygen and nitrogen, producing the same colors and patterns. The southern lights are less often seen because there are fewer people living at high southern latitudes, less landmass within the southern auroral zone. But they are there, glowing above the ice and the dark ocean, whether anyone watches or not. While you imagine green lights above a snowy northern forest, you could just as easily picture similar lights above Antarctic ice shelves, above the Southern Ocean, above research stations where a handful of scientists might be the only humans for hundreds of miles. The aurora is not only about the north, though we tend to think of it that way. It is a polar phenomenon, occurring at both ends of Earth's magnetic axis, twin rings of light embracing the planet. As you go deeper into rest, as your conscious mind becomes quieter and more diffuse, let the old stories and the modern science live side by side without conflict. You can appreciate the aurora as a product of solar particles and atmospheric atoms, as something that follows physical laws precisely and predictably. And at the same time, you can allow it to be a symbol of connection between earth and sky, of continuity across human generations, of beauty that transcends explanation, of the luminous quality that can inhabit physical phenomena when witnessed by conscious beings. The Inuit people have many words for different types of snow, distinguishing between powder and slush and hardpack and wind-driven varieties, because snow is central to their lives and deserves precise language. They also have words for different types of aurora, for the still arcs versus the moving curtains versus the pulsating patches versus the diffuse glows. This is not primitive or pre-scientific. It is precise observation, careful categorization, deep knowledge gained from living beneath these lights and paying attention to them over many lifetimes. Modern science adds to this knowledge rather than replacing it. Physics can explain why the aurora has different forms, can connect those forms to conditions in the magnetosphere and the energy spectrum of precipitating particles. But the indigenous knowledge of how to read the aurora, how to predict its behavior, how to navigate by it, how to incorporate it into stories that teach and preserve cultural values. This knowledge remains valid and valuable, a different kind of understanding serving different purposes. As you rest, consider that there are many ways to know a thing. You can know the aurora through equations, through measurements, through scientific models. You can know it through direct experience, through standing beneath it and watching it move. You can know it through stories, through cultural meaning, through its place in human imagination across centuries. Each way of knowing reveals something true, and none is complete by itself. The aurora you carry in your mind now, as you drift towards sleep, is probably a blend of all these things. Images from photographs or videos, facts you have learned, perhaps memories of seeing the lights yourself or hearing others describe them, emotional associations with wonder or wilderness or the night sky. Your personal aurora is unique to you, shaped by your particular experiences and interests and the specific path that brought you to this moment. And that is perfect. That is as it should be. The aurora exists objectively, but your relationship to it is subjective, personal, meaningful in ways that are specific to you. As you go deeper into rest, let the old stories and the modern understanding blend into a single, integrated knowing. Let the aurora be both physical and symbolic, both explained and mysterious, both comprehended and still capable of inspiring awe. The sky has been speaking to humans for as long as there have been humans to look up. And we have been speaking back, through stories and science, through art and observation, through all the ways we try to understand and integrate and find ourselves reflected in the world beyond ourselves. The conversation continues. The lights continue. And you are part of this long, ongoing exchange between consciousness and cosmos. Underneath everything you have imagined so far, beneath the colored lights, beneath the particles streaming from the sun, beneath the stories humans have told, lies Earth's magnetic field, a quiet, pervasive presence that you cannot see or feel directly but which shapes every aspect of the aurora and, indeed, shapes the possibility of life on this planet's surface. This field is generated deep within the planet, in a region called the outer core, about 1,800 miles beneath your feet. Beneath the solid crust and the viscous mantle lies a shell of liquid iron and nickel, heated to thousands of degrees by the decay of radioactive elements and by the residual heat from Earth's formation 4.6 billion years ago. This liquid metal is not still. It flows, churns, convects, driven by temperature differences and by the planet's rotation. As this electrically conductive liquid metal moves, it generates electric currents. And those electric currents, in turn, create magnetic fields. The fields reinforce the flow of the metal, the flow enhances the fields, and a self-sustaining cycle is established. A geodynamo, a natural generator that has been running for most of Earth's history. The result is a magnetic field that extends from the core through the mantle, through the crust, through the atmosphere, and far out into space. From far away, from space, Earth's magnetic field looks approximately like a dipole, like a giant bar magnet embedded in the planet, with one pole in the far north and one in the far south. But this is only a first approximation. The real field is more complex, with irregularities and asymmetries, with regions where it is stronger or weaker, with slow changes over time as the fluid motions in the core evolve. The magnetic poles wander, drifting gradually across the surface at rates of a few kilometers per year. Over longer timescales, the field can even reverse, with north and south poles switching places, something that has happened hundreds of times in Earth's geological history. But despite this complexity and variability, the field persists. It extends far into space, forming the magnetosphere that deflects most of the solar wind. On the side facing the Sun, where the solar wind pressure is highest, the magnetosphere is compressed to about 10 Earth radii, roughly 40,000 miles from the planet's center. On the night side, where the pressure is released, the field is stretched out into a long tail, the magnetotail, extending hundreds of thousands of miles downstream, far beyond the Moon's orbit. Breathe gently, slowly, as you picture Earth wrapped in this invisible structure, this cocoon of magnetic influence. The shape changes constantly as the solar wind speed and pressure vary, as the direction and strength of the interplanetary magnetic field rotate. Like a flexible shield adjusting to a varying onslaught, the magnetosphere expands and contracts, ripples and reconfigures, always responding to the conditions in the space around it. Without this field, Earth would be much more vulnerable to the solar wind. Charged particles would have direct, easier access to the atmosphere and surface. Over geological time, the solar wind might strip away much of the atmosphere, as it has done on Mars, which lost its global magnetic field billions of years ago and now has only a thin remnant of its original atmosphere. Venus, with no intrinsic magnetic field, has also lost most of its water to space, its hydrogen atoms stripped away by solar wind over eons. Earth, by contrast, maintains its thick atmosphere, its liquid oceans, its conditions suitable for life, in part because the magnetic field shields the planet from the worst of the solar wind's erosive effects. The field is not perfect. Particles still get in, especially near the poles, but it is effective enough. It has been effective for billions of years, allowing life to arise and evolve and diversify, allowing us to exist and to stand beneath the sky wondering about the lights we see there. The auroral zones, where the northern and southern lights most often appear, form roughly circular belts around the magnetic poles, not exactly the geographic poles where Earth's rotation axis meets the surface. The magnetic poles are currently located several hundred miles away from the geographic poles, and they do not even align with each other perfectly. The axis of Earth's magnetic field does not pass exactly through the planet's center. These offsets mean that the auroral zones are not perfectly centered on the geographic poles, not symmetric, not simple circles, but slightly lopsided ovals. At the latitudes where these auroral ovals exist, magnetic field lines that extend far out into the magnetotail bend down and intersect the atmosphere. These are natural pathways, channels along which particles can travel from space to atmosphere, spiraling around the field lines as they descend. When conditions in the magnetosphere change, when energy is released from the magnetotail, when substorms occur, particles are accelerated down these pathways, precipitating into the atmosphere, colliding with oxygen and nitrogen, creating the aurora. When solar wind conditions change dramatically, when a coronal mass ejection arrives from the Sun, or when the interplanetary magnetic field turns strongly southward, the energy input into the magnetosphere increases. Magnetic reconnect ion in the magnetotail can accelerate particles toward Earth with greater intensity, brightening the aurora, making it more active, causing it to expand equatorward beyond its usual latitudes. Substorms, which are shorter-lived disturbances within the magnetosphere, can lead to sudden flares and rapid movements in the auroral curtains, making the sky seem to come alive with almost frantic motion. From the ground, you do not see the magnetosphere. You do not see the magnetic field lines curving through space, the particles spiraling along them, the complex dance of fields and plasmas that determines where and when the aurora appears. You see only the light, only the final result of all these invisible processes. But on some level, the aurora is a readable surface of that invisible structure, a luminous trace of how Earth's magnetic field interacts with the solar wind, a visible symptom of energy flowing through the magnetosphere. It is like seeing waves on an ocean and knowing that beneath them lies an entire body of water, deep and complex, governed by currents and temperature gradients and the pull of the moon. You see the surface effect, and from it you can infer the underlying causes. The aurora is the surface of the magnetosphere made visible, the trace of magnetic field lines written in light across the night sky. Your own body has rhythms too, rhythms that you do not consciously control but that continue reliably, continuously, as long as you live. Your heartbeat, a rhythm generated by electrical signals in cardiac muscle, pulsing 60 or 70 or 80 times per minute, every hour, every day, billions of beats in a lifetime. Your breathing pattern, controlled by centers in your brainstem that monitor carbon dioxide levels in your blood and adjust your respiration accordingly, faster when you exert yourself, slower when you rest, always maintaining homeostasis without your conscious participation. Brain waves, patterns of electrical activity in your cerebral cortex, shifting through different frequencies depending on your state of consciousness. Fast beta waves when you are alert and thinking, slower alpha waves when you are relaxed, even slower theta waves as you drift towards sleep, and finally the long, rolling delta waves of deep sleep. None of these rhythms require your attention to function. They simply continue, governed by biological machinery that operates beneath your awareness. The magnetosphere, with its shifting field lines and flowing currents, has its own dynamic, always changing, always balancing the input from the solar wind against the structure of Earth's magnetic field. The aurora is one expression of that balancing process, one way that energy is dissipated, transformed from the kinetic energy of particles and the potential energy stored in magnetic fields into the visible light of excited atoms. It is an output, a release, a manifestation of the ongoing work of maintaining equilibrium between Sun and Earth. Let the idea of protection and transformation ease you, comfort you, settle over you like a warm blanket. The same magnetic field that keeps you safe from harmful solar radiation, that deflects most of the charged particles that could damage DNA, cause cancer, interfere with cellular processes, also collaborates with the solar wind to produce beauty. Deflection and display are two sides of the same system, two outcomes of the same fundamental interaction. The shield and the light are one. In a way, the aurora is a soft reminder that you live on a planet that is constantly managing its relationship with space, constantly processing the energy that flows toward it from the sun, turning potentially harmful radiation into something gentle enough to admire, visible enough to inspire awe. The planet does not do this for you. It does not consider human aesthetics or emotional responses, but the effect is the same. You benefit from the protection, and you receive the beauty as a side effect, an unintended gift. As you rest, as your own systems continue their automatic functions, your brain and nervous system also manage inputs. Sensations from your body, memories from the day, emotions generated by experiences, random neural firings that produce spontaneous thoughts. During sleep, they reorder these inputs, consolidate the important information into long-term memory, clear away metabolic waste, adjust neurotransmitter levels, strengthen synaptic connections that were activated repeatedly while weakening those that were not used. This is the brain's version of processing and transformation. The aurora can be a symbol of that work, a visible glow that says, energy has been received and processed, something new has been created from it. You do not need to watch every step of the process, do not need to supervise the consolidation of memories or the regulation of hormones. You only need to trust that it is happening, that the systems within you know what they are doing, that they have been refined over millions of years of evolution to perform these functions without your conscious guidance. The Earth's magnetic field has been there for billions of years, since shortly after the planet formed and cooled enough for the iron core to differentiate and begin its convective motions. It has persisted through ice ages and warm periods, through asteroid impacts and volcanic eruptions, through the rise and fall of countless species, through all the changes and chances of geological and biological history. It will persist long after you are gone, long after humanity is gone, as long as the planet's interior remains hot enough to sustain the geodynamo. And the aurora, that luminous expression of the field's interaction with the solar wind, has likewise persisted for as long as both have existed together. The field and the wind, earth and sun, shield and energy source. The lights have glowed above the poles through eons when no eyes existed to see them, through ages when the planet was lifeless rock, through the slow emergence of life and its spread across the continents. The aurora cares nothing for witnesses, continues regardless of observation, is utterly indifferent to whether it is beautiful or meaningful or noticed at all. Yet we notice, we watch, we wonder, and in that wondering, we connect ourselves to the larger processes that shape our world, that make our existence possible, that continue with or without our awareness. The aurora is a teacher, if we let it teach, reminding us of our place within nested systems, within cycles and rhythms and patterns that extend far beyond the human scale, that operate on timescales of seconds and also of billions of years. As you drift deeper now, as consciousness becomes more fluid and less defined, you can let go of the need to understand or analyze or remember. The magnetosphere continues its work. The magnetic field persists. The aurora glows somewhere, above some horizon, seen or unseen. And you, safe within all of this, can finally rest. The northern lights, or Aurora Borealis, are not a fantasy painted onto the sky by imagination or myth. They are a real, physical conversation between the sun, the earth, and the thin air where space begins. As you lie down and close your eyes, as you allow your body to settle into whatever surface holds you, imagine that your physical form is safe on the dark earth below, while your mind, free and light, drifts upward, closer to that slow, silent dance that has been unfolding for billions of years. Breathe in gently, as if drawing in the cold, clean air of a polar night. Air so pure and clear that it seems to carry no weight at all. Breathe out slowly, releasing the entire day into the darkness, letting it dissolve like mist into the vast night sky. As you breathe, know that high above you, impossibly far yet intimately connected to this moment, a river of particles streams from the sun. This is the solar wind, a continuous flow of charged particles, mostly electrons and protons, streaming outward from our star in every direction at hundreds of kilometers per second. Imagine this invisible river, this cosmic current, rushing through the solar system, past Mercury, past Venus, toward Earth. Most of this wind passes by our planet without touching it at all, turned aside by something you cannot see, but that is always there, always working, Earth's magnetic field. This magnetic field is wrapped around the planet like a protective cloak, an invisible shield generated deep within Earth's molten core. It extends far into space, creating a region called the magnetosphere, a bubble of magnetic influence that stands between you and the raw power of the sun. Without this field, the solar wind would strip away our atmosphere, would bombard the surface with radiation. But the field is here, has always been here, quietly doing its work. As you relax your shoulders, feel them dropping away from your ears. Let your jaw soften, Your tongue rests easy in your mouth. Release any tension held in your forehead, around your eyes. As your body softens, picture the Earth as it appears from space, a blue and white sphere suspended in blackness, wrapped in its invisible magnetic cocoon. The magnetosphere stretches on the side facing the sun, compressed by the pressure of the solar wind, like a shield leaning into the force it deflects. On the night side of Earth, away from the sun, the magnetosphere stretches out into a long tail, the magnetotail, drawn out by that same solar wind pressure, extending for hundreds of thousands of kilometers into the darkness behind the planet. In that vast, dark region, energy builds quietly, patiently, like tension stored in a drawn bow, like potential waiting for release. When conditions are right, when the magnetic fields carried by the solar wind align in particular ways with Earth's own field, something beautiful happens. The field lines from the sun and from Earth can reconnect, like two rivers meeting and merging. When this reconnect occurs, the stored energy releases suddenly, flinging particles along invisible magnetic paths toward the poles, toward the high northern and southern latitudes where you might stand and witness the result. These particles, electrons mostly, but also protons, rush downward, guided not by gravity but by the curved geometry of Earth's magnetic field. They follow the field lines that arc down from space into the upper atmosphere, spiraling as they go, accelerating, carrying their energy toward the thin air tens and hundreds of miles above the surface. Let your breath be slow and regular, matching the ancient rhythm of this process. As those particles begin to meet the atmosphere, the tenuous gases that still cling to Earth at those great heights, they collide with atoms and molecules. Mostly oxygen and nitrogen, the same gases you breathe but spread so thin at those altitudes that the air would seem like vacuum to you. Yet there is enough substance there for collisions to occur. When a charged particle from space strikes an atom of oxygen or nitrogen, it transfers energy. The atom becomes excited. One of its electrons is lifted to a higher energy state, like lifting a weight to a higher shelf. But this elevated state is unstable. It cannot last. Within a fraction of a second, or sometimes after lingering for longer moments, that electron falls back to where it began, to its ground state. And when it falls, the excess energy must go somewhere. It is released as light. A tiny packet of electromagnetic energy called a photon is emitted, carrying away the energy that was briefly stored. Each collision creates one of these infinitesimal flashes. No single one is visible. No single photon could catch your eye in the vastness of the night. But there are millions, billions, countless collisions happening simultaneously across a vast region of the upper atmosphere. Together, these invisible individual events flicker and shimmer and blend into something the human eye can perceive. The living curtain of the aurora, the dancing lights, the glowing rivers and ribbons and sheets that stretch across the polar sky. What appears to be a single, coherent phenomenon is actually the sum of innumerable quantum events, each one following the same physical laws, each one contributing its tiny spark to the collective radiance. You do not have to understand every detail of how this works. You do not need to memorize the names of the processes or calculate the energies involved. You can simply rest in the idea, the beautiful truth, that the sky glows because the universe is full of movement, of energy, of constant interaction. And Earth, patient and wise, is expert at turning that movement into something gentle and beautiful. Just as your body turns the day's activity into quiet repair as you sleep, processing experiences, consolidating memories, healing tissues, balancing chemicals, the planet turns stormy solar energy into a luminous veil of calm. The aurora is not chaos made visible. It is order made luminous. It is physics transformed into poetry. As you continue to breathe, as your body grows heavier and more relaxed, know that this process has been happening for as long as Earth has had an atmosphere and a magnetic field. Long before there were eyes to see it, the aurora glowed above the ancient poles. Long before there were minds to wonder at it, the sky danced with colored light. And it will continue long after all of us, continuing its conversation between star and planet, turning energy into beauty in the silent darkness above the ice. Tonight, you are simply a witness to something that does not need witnesses. You are resting beneath a phenomenon that occurs whether or not anyone watches. And there is profound peace in that, in knowing that the universe continues its work, its transformations, its displays of ordered beauty, independent of your attention, your understanding, your presence. You can let go. You can rest. The sky knows what to do. So settle deeper now into your body, into this moment, into this night. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Notice the rise and fall of your chest with each breath. Allow your mind to release its grip on the details, on the need to understand or remember or figure out. Just be here, beneath the imagined aurora, beneath the protective magnetosphere, beneath the streaming solar wind, beneath the vast indifference and simultaneous intimacy of the cosmos. The lights are there, whether you imagine them vividly or not at all. They are there in reality, at this very moment, glowing above the Arctic, above the Antarctic, circling both poles in their perpetual dance. And you are here, safe, breathing, preparing to sleep. That is enough. That is everything. Return now gently to the surface, to the starting place, to the quiet point where you began this journey hours ago. You are lying on your back, or on your side, safe and warm, supported by the bed or floor beneath you, under dark sky that may be real or imagined, that may contain stars or clouds or the soft glow of city lights filtering through your window. Above you, in your imagination or in reality if you are fortunate enough to be in the far north on a clear night, the aurora is still there. But it needs no more description, no more explanation, no more attention. It is simply a soft light that comes and goes, that brightens and fades, that moves and changes according to conditions in the solar wind and magnetosphere, conditions you cannot see and do not need to understand. It is a reminder that the universe is active and connected even in the deepest night, that energy is always flowing and transforming, that beauty can emerge from the interaction of simple physical laws. Your body is heavy now, completely supported by whatever lies beneath you. You feel the pressure where your body contacts the surface, your heels, your calves, your buttocks and back, your shoulders and head. Every point of contact is a point where Earth's gravity pulls you down and the surface pushes back, forces in perfect balance, holding you in place. You are grounded, earthbound, safe. Your breath is slow and regular, requiring no thought, no effort. The autonomic nervous system, that part of you that operates beneath consciousness, has taken over completely. You do not need to remember to breathe. You do not need to count breaths or maintain any particular pattern. Breathing simply happens, as it has happened every moment since your birth, as it will continue until your death. It is one of the most reliable things about being alive. Your thoughts, which were so active earlier in the evening, which seemed so insistent and important, have become lighter, less coherent, less insistent. They drift through your awareness like clouds across a night sky, or like the shifting patterns of the aurora, appearing, changing, dissolving, none of them demanding sustained attention, none of them requiring action or response. You can observe them without engaging, can let them pass without grabbing hold. You do not need to direct your heart, which is beating steadily in your chest, or your circulation, which is delivering oxygen and nutrients to every cell. You do not need to direct your digestive system or your kidneys or your liver or your immune system. All of these are functioning automatically, performing their maintenance work, keeping you alive without your supervision. And you do not need to direct the solar wind or the magnetosphere or the aurora. They also know their work. Everything knows its work. The northern lights are one of the sky's ways of saying that interaction does not always mean violence or conflict. Energy can become beauty. Storms from the sun can become curtains of color in Earth's atmosphere. Distance, 93 million miles between Earth and Sun, can become connection through the solar wind and magnetic fields. Intensity can become gentleness. Power can become grace. Tonight, as you fall asleep, you can let that idea sink deeper, that the world is full of processes that turn raw energy into patterns, chaos into order, potential into actuality. You are not required to stay awake to ensure that the planet keeps turning on its axis, that the sun keeps shining at the center of the solar system, that the aurora keeps glowing above the poles. These things will happen whether you sleep or wake, whether you pay attention or ignore them, whether you understand them or remain ignorant. The universe does not need your vigilance. The processes that sustain your life do not need your supervision. You are allowed, invited, even, to rest within all of this, to be a small, cherished part of a much larger scene, a pattern within patterns, a glow within a greater light. If you wish, you can imagine one last look at the aurora. A soft arc of green stretching from horizon to horizon, perhaps tinged with red at its upper edge, perhaps fringed with faint purple or blue below. It moves slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the breath of some vast being, like a living presence that has no awareness of you but exists in parallel, following its own laws, expressing its own nature. The curtains fold and unfold. The light brightens and dims. The colors shift subtly as conditions change. And then, gently, with no sense of loss or ending, you let the image become dimmer, more distant, less defined. The aurora fades from your mind's eye not because it has ceased to exist, but because you are releasing your hold on it, allowing it to continue without your observation. It becomes only a feeling, a sense of quiet wonder lingering at the very edges of your awareness, a background knowing that somewhere, above some horizon, the sky is glowing softly. The lights will continue their dance whether you watch them or not. The sun will continue to send its wind whether you acknowledge it or not. Earth's magnetic field will continue to protect and channel and create beauty whether you understand it or not. And your body, your faithful companion through this life, will continue its healing and maintenance whether you supervise it or not. All of these things are reliable. All of them know what they are doing. All of them have been doing their work for far longer than you have been alive. You can drift now, fully and completely. You can let consciousness blur and fragment and dissolve. You can stop trying to understand or remember or hold on to anything. You are carried by rhythms older than yourself, the circadian cycle that makes you sleepy at night and alert in the morning, the homeostatic processes that maintain your body's internal balance, the biological drives that ensure you eat and drink and rest when needed. These rhythms have been honed by billions of years of evolution. They are trustworthy, and you are carried by physical laws even older than life. Gravity that holds you to Earth, electromagnetism that makes matter stable and chemistry possible, quantum mechanics that governs every interaction at the smallest scales. These laws were established in the first moments after the Big Bang, encoded into the fabric of space-time itself. They do not change. They do not fail. They do not require belief or understanding to operate. They simply are, and everything that exists is an expression of them. So rest in that knowledge, in that deep certainty that the universe is lawful, that patterns persist, that you are held by forces and structures that are both larger and more reliable than any human institution or intention. Rest under that invisible crown of light that circles the planet's poles, under the protective magnetosphere, under the streaming solar wind, under the distant sun that has been faithfully shining for 4.6 billion years. The sky is awake, carrying on its eternal conversation with the sun, transforming energy into beauty, turning particles into photons, creating light in the darkness. And because the sky is awake, because the universe is managing its processes, Because the earth is holding you and protecting you, and your body is maintaining itself without your help. You are free, finally, completely free, to sleep. Let go now. Let everything go. The aurora, the science, the wonder, the questions, the need to understand or appreciate or witness. Let it all dissolve like mist in morning sunlight, like patterns in sand washed smooth by waves, like thoughts that arise and pass and leave no trace. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. Nothing more you need to think. Nothing more you need to be except simply here, breathing, resting, held. The lights above, the earth below, the breath moving in and out, all of it continuing, all of it perfect as it is, and you, safe within it all, drifting, letting go, finding rest. Until we meet again. I'll see you soon for another episode of Relaxation. May your rest be deep and your dreams be gentle.